Hey guys, it's Ted Bogert. We are back. Yes, we are back with a live TED show with one of my dearest friends. He is just an amazing advocate in our community. I'm going to let him tell you all about that. But this is Dr. Joseph Rosado. What's up, Dr. Joseph Rosado? How are you?
I am well. How are you, my friend?
I am doing really well. I always love having you on the show. And we're not in person today. COVID's a strange little world. But it's still, we get to see your pretty face.
Happy anniversary.
Thank you. Yes, 30 years. 30.
A year ago today, we were on the show together. We did a show together a year ago today.
Yes. Oh, I didn't see that come up. Oh, very cool. See, this is what happens when you plan like you do. I did not plan that at all.
Well, I didn't plan it either. It was very spontaneous. It was like, oh, it showed up in my memory today.
I love it.
I had been on your show a year ago today.
That's awesome. Well, we always love having you on the show. You do so much great work in the community and have a great story. And then you have announcements. So let's get right to it. For those people who don't know you, tell them a little bit about you.
Well, let me see. Where do I begin? I'm a physician by trade. Not a PhD, but an MD, because I've been doing a lot of conversation, having a lot of conversations abroad, and everyone, you know, this is Dr. So-so, Dr. So-and-so, and immediately you think, oh, they're a physician, you know, like MD. And I go, no, I'm a PhD. I'm like, oh, okay. So now you got to reframe your
You're an MD.
So I am an MD. My medical history as a physician, well, prior to being a physician, I started out as a certified nurse's aide here in Central Florida at the age of 16, because back then we could work as certified nurse's aides at the age of 16 in 1978. So from 78 to 80, I was an orderly / nurse's aide. I started out at a nursing home, assisted living facility in Apopka, Florida. Used to be Forest City, now it's called Apopka. And then Florida Hospital, Orlando, downtown, transportation orderly for the X-ray department. Then after that, I went on and became an EMT, then an EMT paramedic, then a cath lab technician, again at Florida Hospital, Orlando. My paramedic years were with Herndon Ambulance and then Florida Rural Metro, all in Central Florida. Then after being an EMT, paramedic, cath lab technician, I went to chiropractic school from 1989 through 1992. And then in 1992, practiced for 5 years, got frustrated with the limited scope of practice, and went on to medical school. Got my MD.
What is that like at that age? Not trying to age you, but you definitely started medical school later.
At 35. I started with a set of twin daughters, a 1.5-year old twin daughters.
Wow. What was that conversation like?
Well, the experience that I had was so earth-shattering for me that made the decision very easy for me to do. And there was a young lady that was a patient of mine. Well, the whole family were patients of mine. Being a chiropractor, I was in Arizona at the time, and the bulk of my practice, 95% of my practice, were Hispanics, and a good percentage of the Hispanics were undocumented folk. And so on a Sunday morning, I get a beeper. My pager goes off, because remember beepers back in the 90s?
I do.
I get the beep, and it's a phone number with 911 at the end. You know, you used to be able to do 911. And so I call the number. I'm like, hi, this is Dr. Rosado. Somebody called me. And so this gentleman answers the phone. And so I recognize his voice. I'm like, Ruben, why are you calling me on a Sunday morning? He's like, oh, well, our daughter Annie has been having a bad fever all night and into this morning. And we want to talk to you about what to do. I'm like, well, remember, I'm your chiropractor. Why are you calling me instead of your family doctor? And he's like, well, we don't have a family doctor. I said, wow. And how about a pediatrician? It's like, no, we don't have a pediatrician either. You're our only doctor. And I'm like, yeah, but I'm a chiropractor. I'm your chiropractor. I can't even tell you to take a Tylenol or an aspirin because you know, it's out of my scope of practice. And he's like, yeah, but, you know, you're all we have. I said, well, why don't you go to the emergency room? It's like, we can't. We're illegal, and we're afraid that if we go, we're going to be deported. Damn.
Wow. So that's a turning point for you.
So I'm like, okay, you know, what I'm going to tell you now is as a friend, not as a chiropractor. You know, put her in a warm, you know, in a tepid bath. Give her Tylenol. Do not give her any aspirin, because if you give her an aspirin, you know, she can have Rice syndrome and all this other stuff. So I talked to him. I said, give me your address. I'll go over there and I'll check on you guys. But, you know, if anything serious happens, take her to the emergency room between now and the time I get there. He said, well, that's our fear. Remember, she used to have febrile seizures as a child. She used to have high fevers and then go into seizures. And I'm like, okay, if the minute you see her having a seizure, dial 911 and get her to the hospital. And so I, you know, get dressed, I get in my car, pre-GPS days, you know, pre-Google. So fortunately, Arizona is really easy. It's all gridded. And so it was easy to find their address. But as I'm pulling into their street, I see an ambulance taking off. And I'm like, oh, damn, it happened. So I pull up to the front of the house. Mom's out there waiting for me. She gets in the car. We follow the ambulance, and I let them know, look, I'm just a friend of the family. I'm here to translate, because again, their English was non-existent. And so we get to the emergency room, and I see this little girl. She was maybe 7 years old, really, really thin girl. And she's in full-blown seizure. And they're starting IVs. They're giving her medications through the IVs. Nothing's working. They're giving her medication like suppositories. Nothing's working. And she's just on and on and on, seizing. And finally, after about an hour and a half, 2 hours of this going on, it finally stops. And I mean, she lost control of her bowels. She lost control of her bladder. And I'm there translating, and once she came out of it, and she was what's called postictal, where she was kind of in and out and just not all there, then the hospital brought in a translator, and then I, you know, said my goodbyes and went to my vehicle. When I got to my car, I was so emotionally drained that I began to cry, and the tears were more of anger and frustration, because I was unable to do anything. Sure. I was in a position where I couldn't do anything. As a paramedic, I could have done more for that little girl than I could have as a chiropractor.
Right.
At that instant, because what she needed, I couldn't do for her with what the profession I had. And so I got home that day to a pregnant wife, and I said, guess what? I'm going to medical school. And she's like, wait a minute, what the hell's going on? Because my daughters still hadn't been born yet. My daughters were born in April of 1996. And so the following year, September of 1997, I started medical school. That was my driving force, that little girl, Annie.
Go ahead.
No, that was my driving force.
I think sharing that's so important, because that's you got to that level of frustration, even though you're in the medical field. I can't even imagine. You know, my daughter's a nurse, and so she's always feeling challenged to help, and if they're out and about, and it's a lot when you can't do certain things, like you said, because it's out of your scope.
Yeah.
So what was the impetus? You go to med school, you get through that. You're still a young man, in my opinion. And you shifted. You have MD, I think of I think of Western medicine, obviously. But you got some new information. Tell us a little bit about that journey. We had a whole bunch of people ask, because of course they looked you up. Tell us a little bit about that.
Well, I got out of medical school in 2000, graduated in 2000, 2001-ish, something like that. And, you know, had a long journey doing different things, clinical trials, research, was the team doctor for the Costa Rican, the Institute of Sports and Recreation in Costa Rica, as well as the Costa Rican Junior Olympic teams, the FIFA, national football teams. But back in 2014, when John Morgan started advertising on TV for Amendment 2 and the decriminalization of medical cannabis in the state of Florida, I sent him an email and said, I'm a physician, I'm an advocate, how do I get involved? And within 24 hours, I was spoken to by the campaign manager, and I immediately got on the Bureau of Speakers and began speaking on behalf of Amendment 2 and the decriminalization of medical cannabis.
That was still risky for you, right? I mean,
yeah, because
I don't think people understand that you had a lot of risk you took in order to be an advocate for that.
Well, for the first 15 minutes of our conversation, Ben Palara, who was the campaign manager for United for Care, and now it's Florida for Care, talking me out of it because he had experiences with other physicians that were like, yeah, I'm all going home, sign me up. And then all of a sudden, the hospitals were giving him crap, giving doctors crap and saying, if you do this, we're going to, revoke your privileges. Or if they were part of a group, the group would say, okay, we don't buy into this. We don't believe this. So if you do this, you're out of the group. So, and at the time I was a state employee. I was a clinic director for a forensic hospital in Gainesville.
Wow.
And I told him, I said, don't worry about it. I am going to do what I'm going to do. And so we began the journey. 2014, Amendment 2 did not pass. We missed it by a few percentage points. And then we went back to the drawing board and had to wait until 2016. But in the meantime, I continued advocating. I continued learning. And then in August of 2016, when we actually finally had product, I was able to give medical cannabis to an adult, a 35-year-old female who had a stage 3 brain tumor. And she did extremely well until this year. She relapsed. And right now she's at a stage 4 brain tumor, frontal lobe. She was doing amazingly well for that entire span of time, teaching yoga in New Smyrna Beach. But, 17 yesterday, she posted that, she's pretty much going to just let whatever happens and just continue to live on.
Great for her.
But from 2016 to present, she was, doing what she did. Then 3 months after that.
Go ahead, please.
Yes. 3 months after that, I was the first in the state of Florida to recommend medical cannabis to a child, a 15-year-old that had a stage 4 head and neck tumor. And unfortunately, he passed the following year in February. But those last few months of his life, the quality of life that he received with the medical cannabis were huge. He was on a morphine pump getting 16 milligrams of morphine was his dose. We were able to cut it to 8 milligrams. He was able to get out of his hospital bed in his bedroom and participate and join his family in the living room, in the kitchen. He was the best man at his brother's wedding. He danced with his sister at the wedding. Oh. So those memories that the family will have will forever be of him being him and not of him being a sick little boy in a hospital bed, drooling and looking at his crotch because he was so highly medicated. And then we continued on. I was all over the news. I was all over TV. And that's how you and I got connected.
That's correct.
Through my work with him and then with other children with schizencephaly, Noah, Trish's son, and Trish, and that group. And then continued on and have progressed in the medical cannabis space. But guess what? There are individuals that have post-traumatic stress disorder. There are individuals that have treatment-resistant depression. There are individuals that are depressed. There are individuals that have chronic pain. There are individuals that have depression secondary to chronic pain. There are individuals that have anxiety, and they can't take cannabis. Why? Because of their jobs. They are first responders. They are firefighters, paramedics, EMTs, people that are close to my heart because I was one. There are police officers, there are nurses, there are doctors that have all these conditions and are unable to use cannabis because if they are drug tested, they test positive for THC, they've just lost their position, lost their job, or worse, whatever. And so, thanks to a lot of the Ivy League schools that have been doing research, I've incorporated and implemented the use of ketamine. Now, what's ketamine? It's not Special K. It's not what you used to do at rave parties a few years ago.
No.
It's not the K, it's not the Special K you did back in the day in the 90s when you were raving. But Yale University in particular, and that's the protocol I use, the Yale protocol, they started studying the use of ketamine for depression, for treatment-resistant depression, for post-traumatic stress disorder, and they found that it works extremely well and much faster than the traditional seizure medications. I'm sorry, that's my phone.
You're good.
Give me 1 second. It's my mother calling.
Oh no! Hi, Mom. You see this later?
Yeah, Mom's gonna have to wait. Sorry about that. Anyway, so because of all the research that they did looking at ketamine, the use of ketamine for depression and how rapidly it works, because the last set of antidepressants, the SSRIs, which is the mainstay for depression, those were invented and came out in the mid 80s. And if you watch football on the weekends, which I know you don't, but for people that do watch like 60 Minutes or sports on the weekends, you'll
Food
see
Network.
You'll see commercials, a lot of commercials for, okay, you've been on antidepressants and you're still depressed. Let's add this new medication to augment what you've been on. And even so, people continue to be depressed and anxious and have post-traumatic stress disorder. And they found that the use of ketamine twice a week for 3 weeks is resolving as much as 95% of the people's depression and not having to take these antidepressants continually.
Isn't that the goal, right? To get them, I mean, I know Big Pharma doesn't want that, but isn't that the goal, to get them off the opiates and everything that is just so addictive? I think people, we had a couple questions before we went live, similar questions. So I'll ask you. People will look at, okay, this sounds like another snake oilman. What is it? Snake salesman. Snake oil salesman. Yeah, the
carpetbagger in a alleyway.
Yes, and they don't. I think people think the only reason people are feeling better is because they're stoned out of their minds. And can you talk a little bit about the things that you've seen? You've seen it make you mentioned it, a dramatic impact in a positive way on their actual physical, mental well-being.
Exactly, and you know, it's not the panacea. Back when we were able to travel, and I was in Colombia in 2019 speaking, before I spoke, one of the pioneers in the cannabis movement worldwide was on stage. He is the right-hand man to the pioneer. Raphael Mechoulam is the one that discovered the structure of Delta-9 THC in the mid-60s, discovered the endocannabinoid system, showing that we produce cannabinoids in our body in the early 80s, discovered the first endocannabinoid in 1992. And this gentleman, Lumir Hanoush, was the one who named the first endocannabinoid. He named it anandamide, which means bliss. Comes from the Sanskrit word ananda, which means bliss. And he was the one that wrote the foreword to my book, Hope and Healing, The Case for Cannabis. And so he's on stage and he states, cannabis is not for everybody. He gets off stage, I make a beeline to him, and I'm like, what the hell do you mean cannabis is not for everybody? And he's like, it's not, Joe. Cannabis is one more tool in the toolbox. And just like not every medication works on everybody, cannabis doesn't work on everybody. So it's not a one size fits all, as many advocates, and I incorrectly was believing and promoting. And the more patients I started managing and treating and seeing, I realized that there were some people that it wasn't working. Their depression, they were still depressed. They were still anxious. They still had their symptoms of the PTSD.
Yeah.
And so I was looking for, what else can I use? What else can I treat patients with that's not going to be addictive, that's not going to cause long-term trauma or deterioration to their body and their system? And that's when I came across the ketamine. And one of my medical cannabis colleagues in South Florida started incorporating it for pain management, and then was seeing how people that were receiving the ketamine injections for pain were also coming back and saying, you know what? I'm sleeping better. You know what? My depression is gone. You know what? My PTSD is under control. I don't have those memories anymore. And then all of a sudden, she starts publishing articles, and I'm calling her up and saying, what are you doing? What's happening? And during the pandemic, when I was managing patients from home, I started researching it. And so I learned a skill while in the midst.
You're not an overachiever at all, Joe.
I'm sorry, what? Say that again.
You're not an overachiever at all.
No, not at all. I'm sorry.
All right, listen, we don't want people commenting. They want to know about what MedSurg Health Institute is.
MedSurg Health Institute is my baby. It's my office, my practice. I used to be in Ormond Beach. I've come back to O-Town. I'm in Orlando, not too far from you. I was hoping I could leave my office and go and hang out with you and have lunch and our special coffee at the Citrus Club. Unfortunately. But that is my practice, and the services that we render there are Suboxone therapy or buprenorphine for the use and treatment of opiate addiction, opiate dependence, people that are on opiates, whether they're prescription or street opiates, together with the medical cannabis for the qualifying conditions per the state of Florida, which, for those of you that don't know them, cancer, any type of cancer, epilepsy, seizures, glaucoma, HIV, AIDS, Crohn's disease, chronic muscle spasms associated or affiliated with multiple sclerosis, Parkinson's disease, Lou Gehrig's disease, and any terminal condition. Now, the state of Florida also allows for what's called a similar to condition, meaning any condition that's chronic and debilitating and is equal to or greater in severity as one of the ones mentioned, then we can qualify a patient. So I didn't mention anxiety, I didn't mention depression, I didn't mention insomnia, but all of those are related to PTSD. And so I can qualify people that suffer with any one of those conditions. And so those conditions in conjunction with, everything else, and then added the ketamine for those individuals that suffer with those the qualifying conditions, the mental health ones, the anxiety, depression, the suicidal ideations, etc. In fact, the FDA has created and has approved a ketamine nasal spray that's used for individuals that have suicidal ideation. They do an instantaneous nasal spray, and it works instantaneously. The only problem with that is that treatment is anywhere between $600 and $900.
Wow.
I'm not going to be charging between $600 and $900 for one treatment. Sorry. So if you're wanting to pay $600 to $900, you can get that. If you want to pay less and get better, you can call our office. But like I said, I'm just up the street from you, and those are the three services that we provide: the buprenorphine, the medical cannabis, and the ketamine therapy for individuals that suffer from treatment-resistant depression, post-traumatic stress disorder, depression secondary to chronic pain, major depressive disorder, suicidal ideations, anxiety, etc.
What do you say to somebody as we close out? What do you say to somebody who hears what you're saying, they identify with one or more of those conditions, and yet the stigma of anything to do with cannabis has held them back?
Well, I encourage them to read my book. They can go to Kindle and buy it for $5. They get a lot of information, and they'll read a lot of the history and a lot of the myths and misnomers that have been taught and promoted and where all of that came from. And hopefully they will get an open mind and will be able to do better with that. In the event that they still have a challenge or a stigma, they can go to my website, josephrosado.md.com, and there's a place there where they can book a 15-minute consultation for free with me. So josephrosado.md.com, book a 15-minute free appointment. If they continue to have questions, concerns, issues, I'll address those questions in that 15-minute span of time. And if they are convinced, great. If they're not, oh well. When I started out,
the consult's so nice because it's just like, you know, you helped educate me. I've always been an advocate, but didn't know enough. And I think, guys, if you're considering it, or you have been suffering, or you just look, you know that that's something you want to entertain. The great thing about Dr. Rosado, is that he is just as open and encouraging, and it doesn't matter what your question is. He's not going to judge you, and it's going to be something that's going to be positive for you. And if it doesn't work for you, great, but at least go to somebody who you know you can trust and that you know you can actually have a conversation with, because there's a fear there, which we've talked about on the show before. There's a fear. There's a whole bunch of unknowns. There's so much misinformation out there on the internet, so you never know one thing to the next. And so having a professional help you, that's golden to me. Absolutely golden.
But
all right.
One of my bosses told me back in the day when I first started as a chiropractor, one of his favorite phrases was, "Convince a man against his will, he's of the same opinion still." And so I'm not going to change anybody's mind that doesn't want to be changed. If they want to change it, that's fine. If not, we have other services in our office that are not cannabis related, are FDA approved medications. And if that's what you prefer to use, we can support you with that.
All right, Dr. Joseph Rosado, you're a joy, my friend. Always. Thanks for
It's always a pleasure, man.
And always a pleasure. You do so much good in the world, and you do it with a smile all the time. I'm just very thankful for you. Very.
And I'm thankful that you're still around with us.
Thank you. Me too. Woo! All right, guys. We'll see you soon. Thanks, Dr. Joseph Rosado. Bye, guys.